So I want to start by asking you if you could tell me a little bit about your journey into medicine. What was it that made you want to become a physician?
It's a funny story. I knew I wanted to be, I loved uniforms. So when I was young, I was born in England, and I wanted to be a policeman because of the uniform. And my mom told me, no, you're not going to be a policeman, because if you be a policeman, you're going to get killed by robbers. So, well, I mean, at that age, you could be easily influenced by parents. So I said, okay. I saw a fireman. I said, wow, that's cool, with all the, you know. And then I said, Mom, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a fireman. Guess what? She says, no, you're not going to be a fireman because you're going to get killed in a fire. So, you know, still wondering, and had this thing about uniforms. I recollect I was watching a TV series called General Hospital back then in Manchester, and I saw a surgeon in the green apparel and, you know, doing that stuff and all that. And being of African heritage, my parents, I mean, I'm originally from Nigeria, and education is either you're a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, or something like that. So the moment I said, oh, I know what I'm going to do, I'm going to be a doctor, guess what? My mom smiles, said, yes, that's it. So at that young age of about, say, 4 or 5, I knew that was it. I wanted to be a doctor, and everything I did consequently was to become a doctor. Now, when I entered medicine, I wanted to be a surgeon. But what turned out for me was that I just did not like the culture of surgeons. Nothing wrong about it, but it just didn't fit into what I could resonate with. Pediatrics did. So as a result, I became a pediatrician, and I think that's been one of the best, besides marrying my wife, one of the best decisions I made in my life.
Beginning with your career as a pediatrician and moving into looking at the scope of work that you do today, and particularly your devotion to medical education, how did that come to be?
So the interesting thing is, when at the age of 8, I went to Nigeria with my parents, so from England to Nigeria, and that's where I encountered medicine for the first time, and training in a tropical context with limited resources compared to the West, where I currently practice, was that, you know, you had teachers, and those teachers, these were people who were not particularly trained to teach, but did this out of their own interest, motivation, and they did a wonderful job. So one of my tutors, he was a professor in medicine, and he was really. He was an amazing fellow, with the passion and the dedication, and I thought to myself, he was a good educator. And I remember, I still recollect that moment when I said, if he could do a great job without a background in medical education, how would it be for me understanding the science of teaching in med-ed and being, he being my role model, doing the same thing. So that was actually what triggered me to actually learn, study med-ed, medical education.
Now, if you think of that path and that career trajectory for yourself, who have been some of your most memorable mentors on your path to becoming a medical educator?
One of the people who've been my mentors would be people like Jared Essed. He was a gynecologist, Maastricht University. My mentors, Albert Scherpbier and Kees van der Vleuten. These are 3 people who truly defined and were role models for me, especially in the science of medical education. Role models that I can identify with, then I'll mention people like Linda Snell, people like Jason Frank, and Deepak Dath. Just to mention a few people who are actively involved in medical education that I am closely interact with. Yes.
I find myself thinking as you talk about just how central the medical educator is to everything that happens in all of our teaching institutions. And I also find myself thinking about my colleagues right now and your colleagues and medical educators all around the world who I think post-pandemic are in a state of the highest degree of burnout that probably we have ever seen.
Yeah.
And I wonder, as you think about that problem, what else do you think we can be doing as institutions and as a profession? What else do we need to be doing to better support our medical educators?
One of the things that we fail to realize is acknowledging the work we're doing. I think that we've taken so many things for granted as organizations, as health institutions, and we've forgotten that the way medicine was practiced a couple of years back is not the way medicine is being practiced today. You know, as a physician yourself, the amount of material that we have to read on a day-to-day basis, the changes in our profession, the introduction of ancillary ways of practicing. We're talking about artificial intelligence now and robotics and all that sort of stuff. There's so much for us to keep up with. That's one thing. We also have a changing culture of the people we're serving. On the one hand, we're arguing that our patients or the people we serve need to be more. They need more autonomy. They have to speak up. Yes, they have to speak up. But with that autonomy comes additional responsibilities, because you know we're constantly having to deal with different ways of speaking up. The way you're spoken to, for example, and you know. The business, the medicine is not medicine like that altruistic form, but medicine is now a business. We have managers, we have administrators who are saying this has to be well, I don't want to call it business, but that is what it amounts to nowadays. It has to be a positive profit margin. We don't want to lose on it, so we have to be efficient in the way we practice medicine. And when you start merging efficiency and all the operational demands to make the business of medicine more efficient, it takes away a lot from why I chose it. For me, I belong to what you call the old school of physicians. I entered medicine because I saw it as a calling.
Yes.
I didn't see it as a business from 9 to 5.
Yes.
And there's that culture change. So if we put all of these different aspects together, then what you do see is that it's becoming nearly impossible for many of us as healthcare providers to manage.
Yes.
We also want to have our free time. We have our families, all that. So it's a big challenge.
Yeah, so many tensions, and much of that can never really be resolved. But I love what you said, I think, about just the importance of, you know, acknowledging not only that this is important work, but also that it is becoming increasingly difficult work in terms of all of these forces, external forces, that are so often outside of our control.
And one thing that we forget to do is to give ourselves a pat on the shoulder.
Yeah.
You know, I know that it should be the order of the day. Yeah. Medicine has become a community where you sanction people, where, you know, the blame game is not safe anymore. That adds another additional tension to this whole conversation. Hardly do you get someone who just says, "Thank you, did a great job today," just like that. I do that. At least I try to do that every day. But you know.
Now, I also would love to touch on some of your work under the DEI banner and sort of work that you have done, including long before this work was perhaps as widely accepted as being fundamental to our educational and professional missions. Could you talk a bit about that?
Sure. And first of all, I want to give a shout out to Canada because one of the things about me as an individual is that I have gotten more recognition from Canada of my work as a person of color, minority. I've been recognized more in Canada than in the Netherlands where I worked initially. That's the truth of the matter. Yeah. And I think, so that's one thing. And when it comes to DEI, when I enter into this space from two angles, probably three. First of all, I do not have a historical narrative of slavery, but I do have a historical narrative of colonialism. That's one. Secondly, I enter into this narrative as someone who has been through the experience of being marginalized and being disadvantaged. And thirdly, I enter into the narrative as someone who's fighting for equity based on what I've been able to achieve over the years and how can I make that possible for others. Those are the three angles in which I enter the narrative of DEI. That's what shapes the conversation I have when it comes to DEI, and that's what shapes the work I do in DEI. You know, I use this example most of the time. People like Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa, all these were, well, I'll leave Mother Teresa out of that, but all of these people were fighting for fairness and equity. They were all killed. Then you have the likes of Malcolm X, Che Guevara, and all that. They were also fighting for equity and fairness, militantly, of course. They were also killed. You get my point? Yes. The issue here is that when we want to talk about equity, there are various ways to go about it. Some choose the activist, militant approach. Others choose the dialogue, conversational approach. I belong to that group. I'm not saying that the way I do it is better than the other. It's the way that works best for me. I think that if I enter into a conversation with you right now, and we really, you know, get into critical conversations, a critical dialogue, and we, you know, map out and go through these different aspects, most of the time, I think I get people to come over to my end and see things through the lens of which I see the issue of diversity and equity. That's my approach.
I want to end by asking you, when you look ahead at all the challenges that we face as a profession, as medical educators, just going forward, in particular as we try to enter into some kind of recovery phase from what we've been through the last 3 years, what gives you hope right now in terms of the future of this profession?
You know the Selma story, the Selma Bridge with Martin Luther King and what happened when there was a... So look at that, recreate that scenario. They were all black people, all marginalized. They were adults, different ages, predominantly black, and they were beaten down by white police. Okay? Yeah. That was, how about probably 30, 40 years back? Yeah. I think 1960, yes. So, yeah. Then fast forward to 2022, the Black Lives Matter thing? A similar story about equity, diversity, and there were marches too, right? Yeah. But guess what? There was a fundamental difference this time, and that gives me hope. Because in that march, there weren't just about black people alone. Yeah. There were youngsters, there were male, female, there were people of different identities, Asians, there were youngsters who did that march. They were treated the same way, of course, we saw that. But that gives me hope because this is not a narrative of just one group anymore, it's a narrative of all of us. And that is what I think we have to start owning it. Don't think that because we're not going through the pain, that it's not our business. It is our business. It has to be our business. We have to be our allies.